This is our second opportunity to talk about the church and its history and your history with it. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. I really appreciate your taking the time and drawing all of this information from your vast memory so that we can share this. We can record this, we can preserve this, and we can share this for those who would be interested.
Yeah.
So, where would you like to begin, Ron? Where would you like to pick up?
I'd like to begin by saying something which I've said to many people many times. I live in the present. I learn from the past. I plan for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, plans for the future are generally based on experience of the past.
Yes.
And I firmly believe that a lot of our people live either in the past or live entirely for the future. They don't look carefully at the present. My own experience is the present teaches a lot of things. My memories go back to the late 1930s, and ministers in the parish of Mono, as it was known at that time. And the Reverend Ernest, and I don't know what his middle name was, his middle initial was P. Woods, in the winter lived in the rectory, which was in the village of Hockley, and he would walk from Hockley to Mona Mills to have a service at 10 o'clock because you couldn't get through with a car, and the car of that era, of course, was a Model A Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would walk to Mona Mills and then hope that somebody would have a horse cutter to take him to Old St. John's at the cemetery. And someone at the cemetery would take him on, would either keep him for lunch or take him up to St. Paul's, which was 20 Side Road and 7th line of Mono, just east of that, and take him there so that he could conduct service there. And then somebody there would take him back to Hockley
Mm-hmm.
to be at Hockley at 7 o'clock at night. The rectory at the cemetery dates back to more in the 1890 era,
Mm-hmm.
in that era. And that rectory was used until the rectory was bought in Hockley, from my understanding, and this may be wrong, in the 30s it was bought. And
1930s.
1930s, that's
Yes.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the minister lived then. There was a transfer made. And that was because if he lived in the cemetery, getting out in the winter was nigh on impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it was moved. And of course it was there until 1990 something.
Now, this is the rectory in Mono Mills.
And it was moved to Mona Mills.
Right.
The rectory was moved.
All right.
And that was I'm pretty sure that was the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember it happening, but never made specific letters about it. And that was in the time that Colin Prodman was here. Now, following Reverend Woods was the Reverend J.D. Patterson, and he was a tall man and a big man, not overweight, but about 6 foot, 6'1" tall, and his wife similarly was about 6 foot tall, and she was a good pianist. She played piano a lot, and I remember spending many hours with her at the piano during the war, 1939, 1945, and we'd have great sing-songs, hymns, yes, but also all kinds of music.
Where would that take place? Where would those
In our
gatherings take
house,
place?
in our house in the village of Hockley.
All right.
She would come to our house because her husband was at meetings throughout the parish, and anytime he went out, she went out too and came to our house.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew her extremely well. Now, and he was a big man with a big voice.
Would those have been big gatherings? Would there be?
No, it
No.
was strictly Francis Patterson and our my family, which consisted of 5 children and my mother and father.
So you took part in these sing-songs.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah.
why don't we have you in the choir?
Because I don't sing. My voice for singing is hopeless now.
I see. All right. But it was all right then.
I think it was.
All right.
But maybe that's a difference in thinking. And so
Well, those are good memories.
Oh, they're
The
good memories,
music.
yeah.
Would be hymns and other
yeah.
pieces,
Oh, yeah.
perhaps.
Real good memories. And,
Okay.
he was the one that really planted the seed, I'd say, to have the cemetery rehabilitated.
Reverend Patterson.
Reverend Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
And he was followed by Reverend H.N. Bracken, Henry Newman Bracken,
Mm-hmm.
to get it right. And he was, in my opinion, one of the most interesting characters I have ever known. Best teacher I have ever known. He knew how to teach. I remember when I was in about grade 11, I took Latin as a language.
Mm-hmm.
And my grade at Christmas time was a huge grade of 32%. And he said, "We'll fix that." And he started teaching me Latin.
So he knew something, took an interest in your life.
He took an interest in everyone's life.
I see.
And he took to teaching me Latin. And at the end of the year, my grade in Latin was 93.
Wonderful.
Was, in my opinion, amazing, particularly for me.
All right.
And you know, he was one of those people. He always knew where to find money, and he was really known around the community because of his ability to raise money. And at that time, the windows that are now in the St. John's Church on Highway 9 came out of St. Paul's Church and St. John's Church, Mona Mills. And all those windows are taken out and put in the new church.
Now, are those the windows that are in the St. Paul's room?
Some of them are in the St. Paul's room. I think 2 of them are in the office. 2 or 3 of them are in the office. And I think that's all the St. Paul's ones. And of course, in the main church, the nave of the church, we have the windows from St. John's, Mona Mills, is where they came from. And rather interestingly, the window on the east side of the church,
Mm-hmm.
that is closest to the sanctuary, is in memory of now, what was her first name? Anyway, her last name was a doctor that invented insulin. Now, his name won't come back either.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to get that.
Banting and Best.
Banting, Dr. Banting.
Yes.
And she was a Banting.
Mm.
And she was married to a fellow called John Edgar Jackson. John Edgar Jackson was a farmer, but one of those amazing people who I believe had a photographic memory. He always remembered whatever he read. He knew what he'd read and knew it well. In about 1947, when Alan Reid was here, he went to Guelph with Alan Reid to talk to all the doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs, all the people that were supposed to really know, and tell them about the atomic energy. And of course, it was fairly new at that time.
Yes.
And he talked about how beneficial it could be and how detrimental it could be. And he talked for an hour. I was not at that, but I know people that were, and I know Alan Reid always said, you could have heard a pin drop in that whole gallery, and there was about 200 of them. And he said, well, he talked.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he talked for an hour, straight out of memory. And he said, about, as far as he was concerned, one of the best talks he ever heard, because it took both sides and treated them both fairly. And
The pros and cons of
that's right.
atomic energy.
That's right. Yeah.
Benefits and potential.
That's right. The potential. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now Alan Reid came here in 1947, the spring of 47, and I guess I was the first person he met in the parish, because he arrived at St. James Church about 8:30 in the morning.
St. James Hockley.
St. James Hockley, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lighting the fire, because it was about late April, early May, just at toward the end of school. He was still going to school.
So that's when you would have been living in your family a few concessions over?
No, we lived just right across the road from St. James Church.
Oh.
Which, like, I could walk there in 2 minutes.
I see.
And I would go and light the fire Sunday morning,
mm-hmm.
so that it would be warm for... now, we were the 10 o'clock service at St. James.
Hmm.
And he arrived and he said, now, I don't know where the other churches are. Would you come with me? So I went with him to the other churches and told him how to get there and so on.
Did the grand tour.
And rather interestingly, and I don't know whether we should put this on tape or not.
We can decide later.
We can decide that later. When we arrived at St. John's, there was no one in the church. They were all standing out on the front lawn. But he got out and we got on in, so he could get into his robes. He got dressed. They still had to come in. So finally he went out and said, would you come in for service, please? And they went in, very quietly. He learned years later, when he was told, what their debate was. This fellow's a student minister, and we had student ministers after the Reverend E.P. Woods was here, and we didn't like it. And so here we are with another student minister. Well, he being what he was, and by the way, he was really a very shy person, but he wasn't shy enough to be kept quiet.
You would think that shyness would be somewhat unusual in somebody choosing to be a minister who has to meet people.
That's right, but he was not shy. And he was likewise, he had been offered a job to be the organist at Grace Church on the Hill, which was probably the richest church in the Diocese of Toronto at that time. And if what I understand now, they are just experiencing difficulty at Grace Church, which is, to me, sad, because it's a beautiful church. And but that was my first introduction to Alan Reid. And he likewise was one of those people who knew where money was, because he came from money. His parents were very wealthy.
But he quickly won over the congregation with his personal skills and his ability.
In no time flat.
I see.
He had experience. Every summer he went to, I think it was Saskatchewan, to help minister out there. And he had good experience with rural people. And he identified with rural people extremely well.
Well, what would happen then for services during the time he was gone?
Oh, that was before he came to our church.
I see.
That was back in the early 40s.
I see.
That he was there when he was going to university. And he had done it some of it when he was in high school. And his transportation out west was horseback. And that was how he got around. And he knew a lot of farmers, of course. And the net result was he identified with our community because at that time we had lots of farmers. And my father knew a lot of them because he did custom thrashing. He went from farmer to farmer thrashing, beginning about the middle of July, and some years he would go right through till January doing thrashing for farmers.
I see.
Because they'd put the grain in the sheaves in the barn, and then the machine would go right into the barn and do the thrashing. And that was common until about 1951, when my father sold the thrashing machine and tractor, and went on to doing other things, a lot of carpentry work and so on. So, contacts were always there, and the farmers were easy to identify with for him.
Yes.
And I remember an episode going with him one day on a trip, and we went to meet a man who I knew the name, but didn't know the man because he was a prominent businessman. And the parish hall at St. James Huckley was in a thinking stage, and we met this chap.
Sorry, it was in a what stage?
In the thinking stage.
I see. Planning
Stage.
Planning stage. All right.
Yeah. And anyway, this fellow, madam, and he pulled out of his pocket a roll of $50 bills that I'll swear was 2 inches high, thick, and he split it in about half and counted out $150 bills. And he said, "Now, I don't want any receipt. I don't want anything that tells people that I gave you $5,000. He said, I want that to go toward the building of the parish hall at St. James Huckley." But he said, when I was a little boy, the minister at St. James Huckley fed us. And he said, no tithes, no nothing, just he fed us. And he said, we couldn't afford anything. But he said, no, I can afford. Now he said, that's $5,000. And if you want this for the rest of it, I'll give it to you. But he said, but otherwise, he said, I will give it to my own church in Tottenham. And he said, I will give that the other $5,000 to that church. That's my church. But he said, if it gets out that I gave you this money, I'll be kicked out of the church.
He'll be kicked out of his Tottenham church.
That's right.
Who would rather have had the money go to them, I'm sure.
So that was how that money got there, and that was roughly half the cost of that parish hall.
Wonderful.
And I don't think anybody ever knew about it other than me. And him, of course.
At the time we are talking about, when Alan Reed was here, how many churches made up the parish at that point, Ron?
As high as 6 churches. Old St. John's at the cemetery, St. John's Mont Mills, St. Paul's Lavertyville, 7th line and 20 Side Road, and St. James Huckley. Plus, from West Mono, those 4 churches were East Mono. From West Mono, there was Church of the Herald Angel and St. Luke's. And at one point in time, he tried to get open St. Matthew's. Now, St. Matthew's, the Church of the Herald Angel, and old St. John's Church at the cemetery are all exactly the same design. Interior. On the exterior, the one difference was that St. Matthew's had the entrance on the side of the church instead of the end of the church. And as a result, if you walked into church late, you were walking right into the minister's path. And it was, I never was in that church until about 2008 or 9 that I was into that church. And of course at that time it was owned by people from Nova Scotia and was a residence.
Oh, really?
And they were quite interesting people. And I was with John Locke here, who I'll talk about later.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, John took an interest in all the churches, and he wanted to see where they were. So he and I
John Lockyer.
John Lockyer.
Yes.
I spent most of a day, a wet day, by the way, with him traveling church to church. We met at St. Paul's, was at that time, of course, also a residence, as was St. Luke's, fourth line at 15 Side Road, a mono. But in Reverend Alan Reed's days, he had managed to chase up people, which he was always doing. I swear he spent 4 or 5 hours a day making sure that he made contact with people to see if he could get them to start the church. And he was very successful in getting people to support the church and to attend church. And
making that personal contact and that invitation.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And he was fortunate enough, as I said earlier, to come from a wealthy family. And as a result, his dad gave him a new car every year. And he always had good transportation and really got to know people. I think of him, he loved to do cross-country skiing. He was likewise a tall man, about 6 feet, but no fat on him whatsoever.
Mm.
And he visited everybody. It didn't matter to him whether they were Anglicans or Roman Catholics or atheist or agnostic or anything. He never backed off on it. He always kept going. And there was a fire on the Mona Angela town line of a log house. And I knew the people, and I still don't know the name, but I'll not mention the name. And here's the owner of the house shoveling snow into the basement window. And he said to him, Tom, and I'll use Tom, that's not his name, why are you shoveling snow in? He said, well, I had my money buried in the basement. And he said, I don't want to get burned. Well, Alan Reed said, it won't burn because it's buried.
Good Lord.
And he had to get to that fire, he had to walk about 1.5 miles from Highway 9 up to where the house was.
I see.
And because the roads were closed, it was winter. And of course, Olive and I were married in St. James Church, Hockley, September 20th, 1952.
This was not a large gathering then, Ron, for the actual...
Well, no, but it was full of the church.
The church was full, yes.
Just brothers and sisters and,
right.
and aunts and uncles, and that was it.
Yeah.
Nothing more. And like, basically, the meal was prepared by all his sisters.
Mm-hmm.
5 sisters she had at that time.
So the reception would be in the church hall?
In the church hall. And the church hall had been the place where my sister had her reception in February of 1951, and it was the first use made of that hall.
Now, is that hall directly across the road from St. James Hockley? Or
No,
is
it is
right
attached to the church.
attached to it?
That's
All
right. It's attached to it.
Okay.
And now, that's the present being 2019, the hall and the church are a residence, plus a display place for old age lighting systems.
Yes.
And they tell me it's
Vintage lighting.
Vintage
store.
lighting,
Yeah.
They tell me it's very interesting, but I've never been in it yet.
Okay.
And one day I'll go in, but that's one day.
All right.
And at that time, St. James was the strong church in the parish.
It was the strongest church?
By a mile.
Really?
Yeah.
That suggests, in terms of attendance.
At the time, that's right. Strictly attendance.
And
based on attendance.
I see.
And money, because there were a number of cottages and rich people out to the west along the Hockley Road and the Ottawasaga River.
Along the river?
Yeah, along the river, people had built cottages.
I see.
And we were supported by, it didn't matter whether it was United or Presbyterian or you name it. They'd come to St. James Hockley because Alan Reid went knocking on their door and invited them to come to church.
Mm-hmm.
And the result was, like the people that owned the Toronto Star at that time came to our church in the summer. But they would put more money on the plate in the summer than anybody else would all through the whole year.
My goodness.
Yeah. And quite a bit more than that. And that's where the money came from.
So the congregation diminished right after Labor Day.
Well, generally speaking, it would go on for another month after Labor Day.
Till Thanksgiving.
Till the
perhaps.
snow flew.
I see.
Once the snow came, they wouldn't come up. And,
Yeah, the traveling would not be as
that's
safe.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it really flourished because of those people. And they were either, some of them were east of Hockley, most of them were west, but along the river
I see.
in Ottawasaga.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in Ottawasaga at that time was well known for rainbow trout. And that was basically about all you ever caught in that river was rainbow trout.
So that would be quite a draw.
Yes. Whereas today, it's stocked with Atlantic salmon,
I see.
and they're very plentiful. Yes. It's still a good fishing river, really,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the rainbow trout.
Was the river larger at that point? Have a better flow, or?
It had like I can well remember, you had no difficulty finding a place you could swim in the Ottawasaga River.
I see.
There are a lot of places. Right today, I don't think that there are very many places where you would swim in it.
Mm-hmm. Not
It's
deep
not
enough.
polluted. It's not polluted, but it just lost.
Just doesn't have the depth.
No.
Mhm.
And that's I can remember at that when we first came to Hockley. If you went less than half a mile north of our house, in late April and May, the road, you wouldn't travel the road because it would have 1.5 feet of water over the road. And the river, of course, would be half a mile wide
Mm-hmm.
in the spring of the year. But that doesn't occur anymore, and the road's still the same level and so on.
Mhm.
But it's just the quantity of flow has
Yes.
changed. And Alan Reid was followed by the Reverend Lloyd McFarland.
Now, Alan Reid was there about how long?
Alan Reid was there from 47 to 56. And he went to Barrie
Mm-hmm.
and was appointed archdeacon not too long after he went to Barrie of Simcoe. And that, of course, really led to being one of the bishops in the Diocese of Toronto. And he was a bishop in the Diocese of Toronto for a year, maybe a year and a half, when he was elected, I should say, Bishop of the Diocese of Ontario at Kingston. And they moved to Kingston, and that's where he spent the rest of his life.
And you knew him from when he was a student minister.
Right.
That's quite a remarkable history.
Yeah, that's right.
As you watched his career evolve.
Yeah. And he was one of those people who really, I think probably music was what really made him shine in a way. But his sermons were simply very down to earth and easy to understand, and so on.
People could relate to his message.
People could relate. Yeah.
What aspect of music do you think was really the strength for him? Was he a singer?
He made the hymns live, and he didn't follow the rate of the speed of the music. He didn't follow that well at all, but he made it so it really was alive.
How did he do that, Ron? What would he do to?
Just he'd speed up the organ. He knew how to
make it go faster, bring it a little. Okay.
He knew how to do it, and that was his.
Did he play?
Oh yes.
He played.
Sure.
Did he play during the services?
Yes. Oh yes, he played in the services.
He did.
Oh yeah.
As well as being the celebrant and.
Oh yeah. He sure did.
Oh my goodness.
And the old pump organ where you paddle with your feet, and of course I'd love to have one of them today because they're worth mint, but there are not many of them around.
Well, we have the pump organ in the church at the cemetery.
Yes, I don't think it works.
Yes.
No.
So he would just be moving back and forth from the pump organ to the pulpit. And,
to wherever. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Most of his sermons, he did write out, but I would not say that he followed them very well. But he always had the basics were there.
He could speak off the cuff with just having his framework.
Nothing to it.
I see, and obviously very well.
Oh yeah.
For people to connect with it.
Now Lloyd McFarlane was very different from him. Really quiet, soft-spoken. If you were at my mother's house, every morning, about 7:30, 8 o'clock, you'd see him walk up the road from the rectory to St. James Church for his morning prayers. And that happened every day, no way out of it. And he was very quiet, but he identified well with the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the church didn't really thrive as much because he did not have the capability to walk into anybody's house and do whatever had to be done.
Connect. And he was not as outgoing.
No, he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But still, the church did well. And
the attendance still
was reasonable,
held, even with the change in minister.
But it dropped down to 4 churches.
I see.
And, at that time, too, while Alan Reed was here, there was a United Church family by the name of Lundy, and their son was Ron, and he played the organ at the Church of the Herald Angel all the time. And he became an Anglican minister, ordained a priest in the Anglican Church, and went up to Kirkland Lake area. And he had risen up to being an archdeacon, and was a really good speaker. I can remember him on rare occasion taking Sarah coming home to our area, and he'd take services, and he was a good, really good man to preach, good to listen to, and he got cancer. I've forgotten what cancer it was, and died very quickly. And,
I see.
Yeah. And
the drop down to 4 churches. Was that a loss of churches within this east part of the parish, or the west, or?
It was a loss of St. Luke's and Herald Angels, the 2 Westmore churches.
I see.
Yeah, it was them that closed.
So they closed due to lack of attendance, lack of financial support.
They had really relied on multiple religions, like Anglicans, United Church, Presbyterian, and so on.
All attending.
Yeah, and they went back to their own religions, and the United Church in Mona Center and the United Church in Camilla were very weak, very extremely weak. And when he was, and Alan Reid was here, and once the churches on the west side of Mono, Anglican churches, were closed, the United Church seemed to pick up, and both in Mono Center and Camilla. And they're still, now, they have sent just made smaller. Mono Center has been sold, and Camilla and Laurel Church has been sold. So now they all come to the church in Camilla, which now has been renamed High County United Church.
I see.
So that gets away from the name of the little village, Camilla. And
all of the churches that closed, did they continue to survive the physical building, but as residences, or none of them have been taken down that you're aware of, or?
No, the only one that's been taken down was the Presbyterian Church on Five Side Road, just west of the 7th line, on the north side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cemetery there as well, Presbyterian Cemetery. Now, when you look at cemeteries, there's a lot of them in Mona Township, and they were mostly connected to churches.
Mm-hmm.
And the churches and some of them are gone, and the cemeteries are still there, and are maintained by the government of the township of Mono. They maintain those cemeteries. And I could name probably half a dozen that they look after. And some of them are very small.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are fair size, but not nearly the size of St. John's Cemetery.
Or 8-acre.
1 acre or less.
Yes,
Yeah,
but our St. John's, as you said before, is 8 acres in
About 8
size.
acres,
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
It's, and like, after we were married, we lived in Weston for the first, till 1956, 52 to 56. And we had bought a lot in 55 in Bolton. And we moved to Bolton in the fall of 56 into our house. And our attachment to Christchurch Bolton, I said to you earlier that I knew Christchurch well.
Yes.
We went to Christchurch Bolton from 56 till my father died on May the 10th, 1965, and we moved back to the Orangeville area.
I see.
At that time.
Why is our cemetery so much larger than all of the others?
Partially because of the beginnings in the 1830s, mainly. The first grade, of course, as you well know, is 1812, the War of 1812.
Yes.
And it's in memory of Henry, excuse me, Henry White.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly the reason it came to be there, but of course the other reason it came to be there was that the St. John's Church had been given 200 acres of land at that location, the cemetery being in the southeast corner of the 100-acre parcel that fronted on the 7th line, and the other 100 that backed onto the back of the one in the 7th line was on the 6th line of Mono. And of course, the way that the roads are made up in Mono are the same as the way the streets of Toronto are made up, where you got Yonge Street,
Mm-hmm.
The next street west was Bathurst, and of course there's come to be other streets in between now. Dufferin, Keele, and Weston Road are all based on the same survey system as is the township of Mono, the township of Angela, and so on. But now when you go west of the township of Mono, it changes because it was a later survey. And the surveys that were done in Mono were a single front, where you had the front one on the road, and you had the front on the other road, and there were two farms back to back. And that's the way that was surveyed. And of course, then you went from 0, which was Front Street in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
Dundas, Bloor, St. Clair, Eglinton, Lawrence.
Going north. Mm-hmm.
Are all 5 lots, 5 farms in between those main street. I mean, of course, all those farms are gone,
Right.
and that's part of what is going on, has gone on in this part of the world. Because I can remember traveling with Alan Reid to Toronto, or from Toronto, and Wilson Avenue had farms along both sides of it at that time, 1947-48. And at that time, my younger brother and I would get on a train here in Orangeville, go to Union Station in Toronto on Friday night. Alan Reid would pick us up there, and we'd go and stay overnight at one of the residences where he lived. And then the next night we'd go and stay at his parents' place in Forest Hill Village, and we'd get introduced to having umpteen number of forks and knives and so on for breakfast, and a really nice cooked breakfast and so on, which we were not used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember going with him to eat in some of the best restaurants in Toronto, and we learned our manners.
Right.
And we learned a lot about that. And I thought Toronto was the greatest place in the world. And in 1950, may have been 49, I can't remember, I went to work for Wonder Bakeries in the city of Toronto. And the headquarters that I was at was out on Greenwood Avenue, south of Danforth.
Hmm.
And my job was to run around the city when the horse-drawn salespeople run out of bread or whatever they run out of. I'd go to the main one, which was on Dovercourt, Davenport, Dovercourt, I never keep it straight. And I have to search out and find these guys that were with horse-drawn delivery boys, find them in the city. Now, I'd have some idea, but at first...
And you didn't have GPS.
No, I don't GPS. And I'll tell you...
How would you go about finding them?
I soon learned the city of Toronto.
You would perhaps know their routes, where they might be.
I knew approximately where they would be, yes.
I see.
But it was.
So you would restock them?
I would take bread or whatever they needed.
I see.
First of all, on first thing in the morning, I go to where the bakery was, and get a truckload of bread, of maybe 100 loaves of bread, and so on, and cakes and tarts and all kinds of baked goods.
So how old would you have been doing this job?
I was 17.
My goodness.
Well, no, I guess it must have been 48 because I couldn't go the year before. I was wanting to go and work for Wonder Bakeries because I had a friend on that, and I knew my people there.
So where would you have been living when you were doing this job?
Oh, I lived with my brother and his wife up, and they lived just north of Wilson Avenue.
I see.
Yeah.
But that would still be a trip down to the...
No, I'm wrong. At that time, they were living just right near the park, High Park.
I see.
And that's where they were married in 40.
That was still a bit of a trek from High Park out to the Wonder
Oh, yeah.
Bakery.
Yeah, but it was pretty quick because you just walked down to the streetcar
All right.
and get on the streetcar, and it was straight through to
All right.
Danforth, Bloor to Danforth, and Danforth to Greenwood.
So Alan Reed maintained his relationship with you and at least your brother after he left
Yes,
here
yes,
and
yes,
went to Toronto.
Yeah, he did. Very close relationship. Yeah.
And at what point did you lose more frequent contact with him?
I guess when his wife died, because she died about what year? I've forgotten what year she died.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't been well for a long time, but she'd run into problems she couldn't see, and she had several health problems, and his health, of course, was starting to deteriorate too. And I know it was in the 90s area, early 90s, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we had contact with him all of that time. And
So you still had...
yeah,
yes.
we always had contact with J.D. Patterson,
Mm-hmm.
some contact with Newman Bracken, because when Newman Bracken left here, he went to St. Augustine of Canterbury, which I think I mentioned to you before.
Yes.
And he spent his whole ministry from the time he left here until he died, when he was still employed at St. Augustine of Canterbury.
Mm-hmm.
And his ability to raise money never failed. He'd been able to, even in Toronto, to identify with people.
Reverend Patterson, would that be the same Patterson family that Rob Patterson, who was attending our church for a while?
No.
Would be. It's a different Patterson.
Different Patterson.
I see.
Entirely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know that he has some ancestral connection to St. John's.
His ancestral was, Carson Patterson was his father.
I see.
And he'd been around, he would have been born somewhere in the early 1900s, Carson. And he and his wife Mildred, who was, they were very active in St. John's Church. He was very active in the township of Albion as well, and well known in Albion Township. And of course, Albion Township became part of Caledon.
Mm-hmm.
And Carson died 15 years ago, 20 years ago, somewhere there. I knew Carson well.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife Mildred as well. She was a school principal in Palgrave, and her problem before she died was she got what we now call Alzheimer's, but at that time it was just dementia.
Mm.
And,
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, but people, I think back to so many people, and all of them had an effect on my life. I think for the good,
Mm-hmm.
and they were hardworking people, because money was not very plentiful. Money was very scarce. I think of my father, my sister, and my older brother. My dad had a farm, which he had bought somewhere around 1927, 26, in there somewhere, and he lost it in 1929 because of a mortgage, and there's no money, and making money was impossible. And they lost the farm, and they moved for that time from being in Ashla Township back into Mono, just across the road from St. Paul Church in Mono. And we lived there.
St. Paul's in Mono.
Right across the street from St. Paul's.
Mm-hmm.
We lived there until June the 10th, 1937, when we moved to the village.
Obviously remember the date. Is there something especially
It's
significant?
It's a date that sticks. My sixth birthday would have been July 25th of that year, and it's a date I remember. There's lots of other dates in this head of mine that I remember too.
All right.
And but I remember going there on that date with my father, and the grass in the front yard was taller than I was. And
My goodness.
And that house was an interesting house because it had belonged to a fellow people by the name of Moffat, and they must have been real collectors because the back kitchen of the house had an attic, and it was full of religious books mainly, but all kinds of books, and there were thousands of them, I'm sure.
Now, these books remained in the house, or
They were there from, and they both had died, the Moffats.
I see.
And Fred Baxter owned the property, and my father bought the property. It was supposedly a house and about a 35-foot square barn, and supposedly 1 acre of land. Now that 1 acre of land, it was fenced, and it had been fenced before we lived there. And in 1989, late 1989, after my mother died, to sell the property, it had to be surveyed because there was no survey. And so it was surveyed, and it was over 2 acres of land instead of 1 acre.
My goodness.
And of course, land got a lot more valuable, and the property was sold after mother died, and I had made a proposition to buy that property, but I wasn't prepared to pay what they finally got for it.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to have bought it, but
Mm-hmm.
it turned out to be far better that I didn't, because I was able to buy property on Highway 10, which proved to be a good investment, and I sold it too, and prior to selling my business.
Mm-hmm.
And when I built that, it was 1 acre property. I bought 63 acres of property for less money than I sold the 1 acre on Highway 10. and
Yes.
but yeah, it's the way of the world.
That's right. As they say,
farmland.
location and
Yeah.
yes.
It was location.
If we come forward from other ministers who have been at St. John's, I think is the most recent you mentioned, was it Reverend McFarlane?
McFarland, yes.
Yes.
Now I kind of lost track then because of the fact we were in Bolton,
Right.
going to Christchurch Bolton.
Right.
And there's some of them I could name. And when we came back in '65, was a fellow gentleman by the name of Bill Cooper. And he was one person who I felt awfully sorry for, because if anything, he was a Pentecostal minister. And he believed the Bible in literal terms. And I do not believe in the Bible in literal terms. But it didn't matter. I still like Bill Cooper. I still do. And I spent many a time after a meeting somewhere, which he and I had gone to, and because of meeting DAS and meetings and stuff like that we went to, and we'd come home and sit in the car in front of the house for a couple of hours talking about religion, talking about the church, the Anglican Church. And he really didn't understand at all. He wasn't very particular about having communion. And of course, I was always a believer, and I still am, that the communion is vital and important to the church. And but he and I always got along well.
How did he, a Pentecostal, become an Anglican minister?
I do not know. I do not know.
I mean, would he have had to go through Wycliffe or Trinity
He would have to go through Wycliffe or Trinity.
Yes.
And he had been raised in the Pentecostal church, and still liked it, and its way of services. And we always had.
But he held on to his Pentecostal fundamental beliefs.
That's correct. He did. Yeah, he didn't let go of them. And eventually, one Sunday morning, he took the service at St. James, and was scheduled to go from St. James to St. John's, Mona Mills, and he didn't go. And that ends his ministry in the parish.
He just stopped.
He just stopped. Yeah.
My goodness.
And as far as I know, like, they had 2 children when they left Hockley.
So he left fairly shortly after that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He never told you why he made that
know.
decision?
No, I lost touch with him completely.
I see.
And
about how long was he here?
it was a good 5 or 6 years.
I see.
He was here a good length of time.
Mm-hmm.
And he had brought some people in. He brought different people in that didn't come to the Anglican Church before, that were similar to his way of thinking. And some of them were, in my opinion, really good people, real good people.
Similar to his Pentecostal belief system?
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That fit with his thinking.
I see.
And a lot of the old-timers, they dropped away. And
well, this could quite easily have caused some division within the church congregation, because those beliefs were
it did.
quite diametrically opposed.
Yeah, particularly where you had, one of the things I haven't mentioned, and I should have, Newman Bracken, when he was here, went to a central treasury. So all the money at every church went into a central treasury. And the only money that stayed in the church, each church, was whatever was given in open offerings, which wasn't a lot of money. And that really was against the rules of the diocese, because every church was supposed to have their own treasury and operate individually. And
Now, by a central treasury, you're talking about the various churches having funds go into, like, one account?
Offerings from St. John would go to the same treasurer as St. John's, as St. Paul's, as Old St. John's.
All right.
All the envelope offerings would go there. And that was the vast majority. And, of course, they had to pay for the maintenance of the churches and to pay the minister and so on. And at that time, of course, the minister was paid by the churches, not by the diocese. Today, it's paid for by the diocese. And at that time, all the large offerings would go to the central treasurer.
But this must have created an interesting situation when money had to be apportioned out to the various churches for maintenance, for example.
That's right. But in a lot of cases, it did not work well, because Mona Mills had a group of people who wouldn't back off in anything, and the net result was that the Mona Mills Church was quite well maintained. The others had difficulty.
Well,
I know when we came back to Hockley, St. James needed a new roof. And me being what I am, I said, I'll pay for the roof and I'll help put it on. And Bob Bloke, who was active in St. James Church at the time, and I put the roof on the church. And that's all there was to it. To me, the central treasury couldn't afford it. I could afford it, and so I paid for it. I don't think anybody ever knew it, but that doesn't matter to me. It's neither here nor there.
I could well see how there would be conflict of people arguing that their church should get a greater share than another one and so forth.
Yeah, that was always a problem. But mind you, with the people liking Newman Bracken like they did, and Alan Reid like they did, there was lots of money, and I mean lots of money.
I see.
There was no shortage of money, and they could afford to do whatever they wanted to do.
Now, would there have been any central committee with representatives from the various churches that would make decisions?
The wardens, you had 2 wardens at each church.
Right.
And so that means you had 8 wardens, and they had the say. They acted as
so they met.
They met
centrally, and
it worked well, particularly with those 2. It worked well for Lloyd McFarlane's range too. It started to fall apart after Lloyd McFarlane, which was 1962, when it seemed to change. And when he left, it seemed to work well until that happened. And
what occurred after that, Ron?
Well, we had several, like Lloyd McFarlane was followed by, I guess it was Bill Cooper. I'd have to look it up. I have it. I have it all in my computer at home. Yeah, and I could easily look it up. And I think it was Bill Cooper, and of course that also caused a great strain because Bill was received well by St. Paul's and reasonably well by St. James. I was a warden at that time, and Bill and I got along quite well together. We did disagree over things in the church affairs, but I still had a high respect for him. He certainly was not an unkind person. He was very kind, and I thought in most cases fairly understanding. But when it came down to he had problems with some people at St. John's, and that's when it really fell apart. Or started to fall apart.
I see.
And you see, like now, when the St. John's Church on Highway 9 was built, I would say that over half the money came from St. James and St. James people.
My goodness.
Just because of who we were.
Yes.
And and at that time, I felt that Central Church, 1 church instead of 4, would be a lot better. I've often questioned it since.
So you identified as being a St. James.
Oh yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So did my wife.
Yes.
But
being born just up the road.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And really, the 2 churches never bothered me. I can remember well many times starting services at a church. Then Alan Reid would come in later, and so we had a communion and so on. But
You mean the service would start before the minister arrived?
That's correct. When I got a license to drive, which was July 25th, 1947, I guess, then I would drive and go to wherever I had to go and to start the service.
Now, would this
And-
generally be morning prayer and communion less frequently, or what was the custom?
No, not really. The communion service, the first 20 minutes or so, are prayers and so on that anybody
And
could,
readings?
could take.
Yes.
And they're a little different now than they were then, but they were a little longer,
Mm-hmm.
and the old book. And that's what would happen, and he would come in and
So you would be one of the individuals who might
that's
start the service and get it to that stage?
John Herder was another, Kurt Herder's
Kurt's-
father.
Oh, all right.
There was another chap who was named. He did it for a short period of time, and when he left, he had farmed on the 7th line of Mono, and when he left there, he went to being the superintendent of the Diocesan Conference Center on St. John's Road at the north end of Aurora, off to the west of Yonge Street.
I see.
And that property was sold by the diocese a few years ago for a lot of dollars.
So would you then have, what qualifications would you have had to take that role in the service? As lay reader or?
I was a lay reader,
All right,
and I had written an examination to be a lay reader, which is no longer required.
I see.
Lay readers can be appointed, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't ask any questions. But that time you had to
Just
write.
happy to have you as a lay reader,
yeah.
right? Okay.
And at that time I had to write an exam and had to talk about books I had read
I see.
and see.
Religious books.
Yeah, religious books.
Right.
Yeah. And I did that. Like similarly, when we moved to Bolton in 1956, there was a church at Castlemore, which is down south of Bolton,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit west of Highway 50, and the Anglican church there. And I often went there and took morning prayer,
The whole service?
the whole service.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And that was 56 to 65.
Yes.
So my church is pretty well ingrained in me. And,
Yes.
and that,
So the church, for example, like in Castlemore, they just couldn't afford a minister, or?
well, they made it part of. They couldn't afford a minister, no.
Yes.
And the minister, Jack Crouch, was our minister at the time, and they wanted to have an 11 o'clock service, and so I would be absent from the 11 o'clock service at Christ Church, and they knew where I was, and
You weren't getting into trouble. You
No,
were
I'm
just
sorry,
down the
but
road a
I was
ways.
behaving half decent. But the congregation of about 15, 20 people,
Mm-hmm.
not a lot. But now there's still a little cemetery at Castlemore.
Mm-hmm.
The church is gone, but the cemetery's looked
The
after.
building's gone.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, now some of the roads there's at least one street down there that's called Castlemore Street. And
Mhm.
it actually was on the Gore Road, was where it was.
So when you came back to this area from Bolton, you were at St. James,
Yes.
and who would have been minister at that point?
His name I know as well as anything. Oh. He and his wife, and my name will come to me in a minute or two,
Yes.
were the best combination of husband and wife that I ever knew to be a minister. He was, she was as much a minister as he was, but didn't have the papers.
Mm-hmm.
But the work she did was unbelievable. just contacting with people. And she'd go anywhere to anybody at any time. And they had 5 or 6 children of their own. David Kay.
David Kay.
And Lorraine Kay.
Oh,